Yeah, let's fire it up.
Yeah. Alrighty. Hello and welcome to the More Than Words panel, where we'll be discussing the best ways to improve your module with layout artists, illustrators, and editors on board, and what they bring to the table, why you should really consider bringing them along on the journey to completion. So I'll introduce our panel first. We have Alex Guillotte, who you might know from Viral, the Grindhouse series, and Carnival of Madness, to name a small handful of his Miskatonic Repository titles. He is prolific. Give me a second here. We also have Evlyn Moreau, artist and writer. Evlyn Moreau, artist and writer, and you might know her work from Where the Wheat Grows Tall, Cleaning of Prison Station Echo, and Field of Screams. Lastly, we have Leslie Horn, aka XP Lovecraft. You might know her from her YouTube channel, but she's also an editor, and she has worked on several titles. But being an editor does not get the glory she deserves. And lastly, I'm John Casey. I'll be your moderator for today. Full disclosure, I work in technical writing, so it's like RPG writing, but for industrial chillers. So, you know, it's very fun. It's very interesting. And we have a lot in common, the three of us. 4 of us, actually, because I didn't count myself. So just to get us started, I'd like to say thanks for coming, guys. And I suppose first question would be, how did each of you get started? Leslie, would you mind starting?
Sure, of course. So I actually started based on my YouTube channel. So I had done some scenario reviews for Call of Cthulhu. I've been playing Call of Cthulhu for a very long time and have loved being a keeper for it. And I started talking about role-playing games, and then specifically started doing scenario reviews and reviews for the Miskatonic Repository scenarios. And that really got me interested in working with individual authors on those scenarios. So like the way that I analyze and break down a scenario in my review is very similar to how I'd break it down when I'm doing developmental or line editing. And so it felt like a pretty natural transition to utilize some of those skills and really help authors and new authors, especially kind of help them to organize all of their thoughts and use their creative energy and work together to make something really awesome. So that's how I got started.
Oh, cool. Because I was like, I didn't know which came first, the editing or the YouTube channel.
Yeah, YouTube channel came first.
Mm-hmm. Evlyn, you up for going next?
Oh, yes. I started by studying comic books, and I was doing comic books for a while. But you know, doing comics is very difficult. And,
famously not a money rolling biz.
And so eventually I switched it to more like doing illustration work, and because I was playing role-playing games, I had my blog, the Chiron Chromatic, which was about mostly old school OSR stuff. I ended up like being involved in the project and everything. Did a lot of publishing little designs and stuff. Yeah.
I, as a person who reads a lot of Evlyn designs, I'm a big fan. And Alex, I suppose that leaves you for last, but certainly not least.
Well, I started off doing some D&D stuff on DriveThruRPG, but I've always loved horror and particularly Lovecraft, and then as soon as I saw that Miskatonic Repository was available, because I never thought I'd have the chance to actually publish, for it, and then that came along, and so I immediately started to write something for it, because I really that's what I love to do most, is the horror. As anyone's playing any of my D&D games will tell you, it always kind of veers that way eventually. Mm-hmm. So
oh, how did this happen?
Yeah, exactly. So it ends up in horror anyway, but this gave me the opportunity to do it, for real, and that was great.
Mm-hmm. All right, that's great. So this one is kind of open to all 3 of you at the same time, because I'm just how can we explain the benefits of bringing other folks on board? I know a lot of the time it might just be, oh, I don't know how to do this, and thus I get someone else to do it. But what would you say, for example, would be the benefit between bringing on an illustrator and comparing that with using just like public domain images from any number of websites we can think of, which I don't remember right now?
Well, I can.
Yeah, I'd love to hear.
Jump in on that. So I think the big advantage is to have a bit of back and forth, like receiving inspiration back from the illustrators. And like often when I illustrate something, it changes a bit the feel about it. Like we start with words, and like for Prize on Echo, there was an AI, and they said, oh, maybe the AI is a small icon that you see on the screen, and I drew the AI icon, and it was so cute and fun that everybody liked it. It was like, oh yes, we need to use that more, and the AI gained a more important role in the scenario with that, So there's a bit of unexpected things that you receive back. So I think that's a good way to spark creativity and to mix ideas around, to move things.
Yeah, I mean, I think anything that you can add to it, whether it's illustrators or an editor particularly, is going to add that professionalism to your work that people look for. Because you can have the best idea, and there's a lot of people out there with great ideas, which is why I love this community, and I love to support new people who are doing something. They have a great idea, but they don't know how to put it together. They don't necessarily have the artistic skills or the layout skills or any of that. But every little bit you can add is going to add to that sort of professionalism. It's going to get your stuff noticed, first of all, but have people take it seriously and actually get people to see it. If it looks the more professional it looks, the more people are likely to buy it. That's just how people are. And so obviously the art is a big one, especially for the cover, because that's the first thing people see when they look on DriveThruRPG. They're going to see your thumbnail, and that's going to entice them to go, oh, this looks interesting. Then they'll click on it and potentially see more. Now, once they get it, of course, it's an editor is critical, because just even a cursory edit, something very simple, is still going to just taking out not even editing but proofreading is going to take out the little spelling errors that are the signs of everyone who's ever sort of first published something on their own. But even if you haven't, those always get through anyway, right?
Yeah.
I think we've all encountered those at some point, right? Where it's in tech comms, we say it's like you can't see the trees because you've just been looking at them for too long.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
Your
Even
brain doesn't see this anymore.
Professional editors shouldn't edit their own things. I mean,
totally. Stephen King.
100%. I mean, it's okay to look at it, but get someone else. And all these little things add up. And I mean, no one should be afraid to use, stuff you get from, like Wiki Commons or whatever it is, or, a lot of the public domain stuff. A lot of stuff is great. And you could even just get an old picture and get a decent title on it. That's still not bad. Right, that's still going to get you something that looks professional, and then later, as you sort of build up and make a name for yourself or get some extra money, you can start looking for artists and then start building up from there. But you got to start somewhere. So you start with the simplest. You start with public domain art. And you start with proof, simple proofreading, which is the least expensive you're gonna get.
Yeah, so I can speak a little bit on the editing piece. When an author or a writer sits with their scenario for a long time, it's all in their head and they know everything. They know everything about the scenario. And so sometimes they forget that the keeper that is brand new to the scenario might need some additional information.
Oh, wow. How is he meant to? The keeper who's reading this, look, they'll just know,
right? They'll
all
just
the
know.
things that I just know, right?
Oh,
Yes.
and that's an excellent point. That's even next level, right? When you, any editor is going to be better than no editor. But if you can get an editor who also knows the game, that's
100%.
Another order of magnitude better. You're gonna, because they're gonna see stuff in there that you're not. and you know, like you're saying, if you've been looking at this for so long, you know the backstory, even if you didn't write it down, you know what all these things are supposed to be, you know what that guy's history is.
Yeah.
But it's not, but if it's not there, the other keepers aren't going to know it.
Yep.
And on the other end,
the other piece of it, I think, is more brains are always better. So like, no matter who you're working with, whether it's an editor, an artist, a format artist, layout artist, whatever it is, they're going to have more ideas and more energy flowing through the project. And that means when it actually reaches the table, that is more likely to resonate with more different types of people as well, because you have a different perspectives that are going into making these creations. So then it can really offer a lot of value to all the people that are going to be playing your game.
And like I keep coming back to what you, in my head throughout this conversation, I keep coming back to, you can create a dialogue with the other contributor where, you know, they bounce off something that you wrote that you're like, actually, yeah, that's actually not very good. But then they hit something else and you're like, you know, it's a background element and it gets moved to the front because now it's someone has caught onto it and you're like, actually, yeah, that is a good idea. That's I was going to say, at the other end of the spectrum to not having enough information is having too much information, which so many of us could learn to do without. But your Miskatonic Repository entry is not a short story. It is it is a module first and foremost. But yeah, because I mean, I think it is one of those things where, for example, if you do the 1 month writing course, you might kind of be in the headspace of, I can do all of this myself and I should do all of this myself, when in reality, bringing other people on board just makes it so much richer, and like it introduces its own complications in terms of aligning timelines and so on. But I mean, it is an opportunity to make your scenario, I think, just also they're basically free proofreaders to some extent. But you know, it is an opportunity to make it that bit more vibrant than it would have been when it was just you. And if you think of it as a conversation, yeah, that makes sense, right?
And even if you could just get someone else's eyes on it, you know, just someone else who, you know, who plays the game, who can just read through it for you, even if they're not a proofreader, if they're not great at spelling, they'll still pick up on things that maybe you missed, you know, because again, your eyes have been on it for so long that you just can't see it. And it can be little typos, it can be little sentences that just don't sound right, or, you know, something that looks like it's missing, you know. So anything is better than nothing like that. So
yeah, totally.
Don't be afraid to find someone who's, you know, just, can you take a look at this?
Yeah, absolutely. Evan, you had something you were going to say.
Yeah, I was saying that sadly, it's not all project that I have the opportunity to include other people during the production and creativity project as step. Sometimes it's already written and they contact you to say, oh, can you illustrate that? And you just, you know, give them the work and there's no back and forth.
Oh, totally.
So it's not always that ideal situation when you can have, you know, like interaction.
Where
like
you
that.
become part of the process rather than kind of an afterthought. And maybe that's something worth talking about. I had this for later on, but I think it's worth talking about now, is so when do you bring in an editor or a layout designer or an illustrator? Do you wait till the end, or do you kind of write your stuff around being like, yeah, I'd like to bring someone in to have a look at this? Or like, obviously you guys are going to have your opinions as people who have done a little bit of most of these things. I think we've all done some bit of writing at least. So we're like, yeah, you know, sometimes the process is that you get the first draft and then you send off. And then sometimes it's going to be different. But in terms of, as in your respective fields, when would you ideally like to be contacted by someone writing a module, I guess?
That's a great question. So this might be a complicated answer. But for editing in particular, there's lots of different types of editors that you can get in different stages of editing, which I think can be somewhat intimidating to new authors when they're like, I don't know what type of editor I need. I don't understand. So I'm going to try and break it down a little bit. There's developmental editing, which is kind of the first stage of the process. There's line editing, and then there's copy editing and proofreading. That's like if you get all of the editing. And I don't necessarily recommend that you would have to have an editor for each of those different stages. You might pick and choose based on your strengths. And particularly if you're just starting out, you might not use all of those different types of editors. But depending on which type you do feel like you need would be different when you would contact them. So a developmental editor, which is the majority of the work that I do, it's earlier in the process. Once you have your draft written and you feel like, yeah, I have the bones of this ready to go, then I would recommend you reach out to developmental editor, and that will be a really collaborative effort. So I like to work pretty closely with my authors and going back and forth, brainstorming, coming up with solutions, and working together to really make it the best that it can be. So that's like after first draft, and then there might be a couple of drafts that go back and forth. The line editing process, which I also do, is looking at word choice and sentence structure and style and consistency, those kinds of things, actual like going line by line and editing what the words are. And that is once you know, yes, this is the story I want to tell. Yes, this is the scenario, and we have everything organized the way we want it. Then I can go in and start editing the individual lines. Copy editing, which I don't do much of that realm. That is more of the technical side of things, grammar, punctuation, style guides, making sure you're aligning to whatever game that you're playing. That is going to be after your line edit. So you have everything, all the stuff written out as you would like to, then someone comes in and corrects all that technical stuff.
Yeah, then someone says you never use the word would, and there's no desire in technical communications.
Yes. Yes. And then likely, if you're going to have a layout artist and all of the other artwork that is going into the scenario, that would come next, but I'll let them speak more on that, because proofreading is the very, very last step of the process. This is your last line of defense before anything gets published. So that's going to be at the very end, everything you're like, yes, I'm ready to press the button and publish this. But before you do, get a proofreader, because they're gonna get all of those little things that everyone else in the beginning stage of the process missed. And for people that are really involved and have looked at the scenario for a ton of time, which is the author, developmental editor, line editor, I look at the scenario a ton of times. So by the proofreading stage, I'm blind to all that stuff. So that's where it's really essential to get a different set of eyes on your project and your
just get someone who has not been involved before this point.
Yes, yeah, that's exactly right.
Though I think we can all agree you'd almost guarantee that you can go through all the proofreading and all the editing and publish it, and a week later someone's going to come up with, this was spelled wrong.
100%, yes.
On this one page, you spelled Butterworth with a U instead of O. Why was that? Was that a special hint? No, it's just that no one noticed, because it's really not that important.
I would say for authors to not be bothered by that, because it happens for everyone. So don't get too like scared about, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have a typo, because you probably will.
I do love that we've talked about like there's so many steps, blah 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 blah. We've made it sound huge, but it's actually fine.
Yeah, it's totally fine. It's totally fine.
Alex, Evlyn, when would you guys like to kind of get, if in your ideal scenario where it's kind of collaborative and someone has sought you out for your previous work, when's your ideal to be brought in?
Well, I do mostly like cover and layouts, and so that can be done pretty early on in the process, because and that could be certainly be a lot more collaborative. So if I know if I have an outline of what their scenario is and what the overall themes and mood are, I can begin to come up with ideas for what it could look like. If we're talking borders, if we're talking art, if we're talking the cover. I tend to do things really weird, and like when I get an idea to do something, I'll make a cover first, and I don't always use that final cover, but it keeps me inspired. So I have that on my Google Doc or whatever I'm writing in, so that it gets me in the mood immediately when I go there. But yeah, so that can be done pretty early on if you want. I mean, it can be later as well, but I find that can help to inspire people, like it does me. They can the minute they see a cover, they're like, oh, this could be a real thing now, and now they feel a little bit more compelled to sort of write more, if that makes sense.
Totally. There's definitely a feedback loop element, right? Where it's like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, I put this thing out there, and then someone read what I said, and then this came out of it, and I don't know what this image. I wouldn't have made this, but that's cool.
Yeah,
I think
I've
actually totally
I've actually rewritten parts of scenarios because I found a really cool piece of art for it, and I was like, okay, I got to change this description because this is much better. this art is going to work much better for it, and I think I'm going to change that up a little bit.
Yeah, totally. Evlyn, you've mentioned sometimes it's like at the end, and you're like, I guess I just draw a crocodile man.
Yes. So, well, for me, I think the best step I like to be involved is when the author has like a clear idea of what they are doing. Like they feel confident about their stuff, but there's still some element that are being able to change, like NPCs or maybe some monsters, like things that you can say, oh, maybe that will be a bit different from that. So I like that when there's still some element of the scenario that can still be in change and flux, but when there's at least a solid grasp of the base and things, and where the author know where they were doing. I know that sometimes you can involve an illustrator at earlier in the stage when you want to kind of brainstorm, and the illustrator can give you some like concept art stuff. But for me, that's more involving. I prefer a bit later, like to illustrate things that are already defined, but my illustration will maybe help them gain like different personality, or maybe like change them a bit, but not too much. So I think that's the step I prefer, because it depends on the energy. If I'm working on multiple projects, I cannot be super involved.
You can't be present, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely a thing as well, where as a person who has done the occasional bit of freelance stuff, it's like, yeah, no, it absolutely depends on how my month is going.
Yeah, because you need to keep, you need like to have this construction of the scenario in your head, like you need to know, okay, that's what's going on in there, that's what the author is trying to do, so you need to understand what's going on. So yeah, that takes some energy to do that.
Yeah, and as Alex mentioned, like one of the things that as a person who reads a lot of modules, I'm always like, okay, what are the themes this creator is trying to bring across? And for me, as again a reader, I'm just like, all the fields you guys work in can add so much to bring those across to me, where I'm like, oh yeah, the word choice, or the particularly weird, gross border that is around the top and bottom, where it's like, oh, it's a little bit trippy. Or the illustration where it's, okay, so this guy has, just some element that I couldn't have imagined from the simple block of text. I didn't imagine that the crocodile man wore a business suit. I don't know why, but I just didn't. Maybe I'm just biased.
If I can add something.
Oh, of course.
Sometimes having the layout is also fun for me, because it leaves me like space. I know, like, oh, I got that space near that text, so I can make illustration that fit the text and the space. So that's really useful.
Oh, good. Yeah, because I've seen some of your stuff using zines, Evlyn, again, where it's just like, it's a small thing you did for Patreon, but then it's just, someone has put it in, like, just, they had a bit of space to fill, and it works well there, and they've deployed it well into that space. But I was wondering, that was going to be a later question as well, being like, hey, do you guys find it interesting working around limitations when it's like, okay, so here's this kind of, this much is pinned down, do what you can in this space, do what you have a certain amount of free license, but
yeah.
but
I think the other thing to consider too is sort of compatibility, right? And that goes for artists, for layout people, for even editors, because I've used several different editors, and they sort of do it a different way. And I've even had it where I've had someone edit, and I just for the heck of it ran it through someone else, and they literally changed some of the stuff the other editor changed. Like it was it was just like, because some of it is just a matter of preference, and sometimes it comes down to that. Well, I prefer the commas here, and so
the Oxford comma will not be mentioned in this panel beyond this moment. All I'm saying is the Chicago Manual of Style dictates it.
But it's about finding, now at first, obviously, you're not necessarily going to have that luxury. If someone's doing it for free or for a percentage of your profit or whatever, or for trade, you don't have as much of a choice, and so you take what you can, and it's still better. But eventually, you can sort of begin to find people who are more compatible with your style, right? And so, it doesn't mean the other artists are bad, or this layout person is bad. It just means that they're more in line with what I do, and there's nothing wrong with that. So if you don't hit it off with a particular artist or a layout person or editor, it's okay. You can you can potentially find someone else.
Yeah, I mean that is one of the benefits. We're all at the day completely different people with our own little quirks and our own little hang-ups. For example, I work with a person who cannot abide passive sentence constructions. She just cannot handle them. She just hates them. Really, just lasers in on them. But and you're like, it's literally the only way to say this in a legally responsible manner. But she won't have it. And then you get a lawyer involved, and you're like, see, I told you. But that
I was gonna actually add a little bit of color to what Alex was saying about if you don't mesh well with a certain freelancer or whoever you're working with. I think it's, for an editor in particular, there's a couple things that you can do up front to see if you're going to have good chemistry with that person and work well together. And so I would recommend that if you are going to hire an editor and you're going to pay for this editor, to ask for a sample. I always do samples for people, so you can get exactly the type of comments that I'm going to leave you and the type of feedback that you're going to expect. But also a phone call is great, just to connect and get to know each other, see if you get along. I think it's really important that you kind of have someone that you feel comfortable working with. So I think those are two things that can really help, is particularly on the editing side if you're looking to hire someone.
Yeah, totally. And
it's slightly contradicting what I said a little bit, is sometimes having someone you don't quite agree with can help too. I've had that with people I collaborate with. There's a little bit of friction where, you tend to pull in slightly different directions. And so you can end up with something better ultimately, because you it takes you in directions you may not have thought of.
Yeah,
because
with mature people.
What's that?
Yeah,
with mature people, it's
I think as long as it's respectful, we can all handle
Oh,
it.
right.
But then it's like,
well, that's what I love about this community as a whole. Everyone I've so far interacted with in the Miskatonic Repository is just awesome. They're all great people, all willing to discuss and help, and even if they can't help directly, they help indirectly through advice and directing you towards different people. It's great. I haven't had any, so far, knock on wood, any bad experiences yet. So my fingers crossed.
Yeah. That actually does bring me to something you said, Alex, brings me to my next. It was actually literally next on the list. So when you're, I've asked about the stage in your process when in the stage in the creation process when you'd like to be approached, but the manner of approach is important. So how clear, and and it's one of those things that's fuzzy as well, right? Because if you come very early in the process to another person and you're like, hey man, I really need your help with I need some illustrations here, and I'd love some feedback on the layout, and you're like, okay, well, you've actually glossed over a lot of stuff I'm going to need to do here. So how can a person be as well prepared as possible when they're contacting a collaborator, well, a prospective collaborator even, on just like, how can they have their house in order so that you save any miscommunication, so that you can just be like, okay, we're on the same page from, in terms of we both see the playing field. You need me to do XYZ, not XYZ plus A, because you failed to mention it and just assumed that I would. And again, I think that's what we were saying about like just being respectful and being a mature person who understands what you're getting into to some extent when you bring another person on board. But yeah, I guess I just had
experience recently where someone had approached me to do some a layout and some design, and so we were talking through a Zoom chat, and so I'm asking, sort of, give me the elevator pitch, explain to me what the scenario is, so I can get some ideas, and I didn't get it. It was, or it sounded a little weird, and I'm like, that sounds kind of choppy. I don't know. It's like, so well, you know what? I'll send you the document. So he sent me his document at that point, and I read it, and it was perfectly clear. The document was fine. The scenario was great, but the way, he couldn't quite put it into words for me, and so there was a little, I was a little concerned at first that, that it wasn't going to work out. But then it turned out that it was just that particular person wasn't great at verbally explaining what they were trying to do. And so that can be difficult sometimes for people to sort of explain themselves or describe the indescribable.
I got this really fucked up monster, man. You're gonna love it. Okay, so here's the thing.
It's ineffable. I need a cover that's ineffable. Okay.
I need a color that's like nothing you've ever seen before.
never before seen on Earth. Yeah.
It's purple.
So
nice.
But
I know that's always purple, by the way. It's always purple.
Yeah. Sometimes a little pink in there. Like
sometimes it's just magenta.
Yeah.
But it's nearly always that little segment. Yeah, because I mean, I know from in the past when I've had to bring other people on board with work that I've done at short notice, it's been like, oh gosh, what's the pertinent information this person needs? And that, I would say, can we agree that when you're talking to a writer, if you were a writer approaching somebody, don't worry about it. Calm down.
Yeah, I was going to say that I actually take that a lot on the person that you're reaching out to, because they're more experienced in the type of questions that they would need to ask the author to get to exactly what they're expecting. So in particular with new authors, like I wouldn't stress too much about, oh, do I have everything that I need? Because it should be more exploratory when you're trying to start working with someone. And there should be a conversation up front about what expectations are, and the person that you are working with can help get you to that destination. So, I mean, Alex talked about having a blurb elevator pitch. I think that's really important. So you can be able to speak to your work and be able to explain that to whoever you're working with. But I personally put a lot of that responsibility on myself to be able to ask the author the right questions so that we are aligned and know what we're both working on.
And another good handy thing about a blurb, that's something you can just put on drive-through later. If you're selling it to a collaborator, you'll sell it to the reader at the end. Because ultimately, they'll also be a collaborator in terms of getting it to the table, which maybe that's a writing panel question, maybe not. So yeah, I think that's, because that was like, that question was just something I wanted to try and articulate, because I know it can be, oh gosh, I'm going to ask someone to do work on my thing. I don't want to, I want it to be what I want rather than what I'm miscommunicating. And I'm just like, it's going to be a bit of both.
Yes.
Don't worry about it.
Well, if I can add, I think,
of course,
the quantity of work that will be needed, like like number of illustrations, size, and stuff. Like for me to have an idea of what my involvement would be in the project. So that at the beginning, and when I'm approached, that's something it's important for me to know to see if I'm like, okay, that's something I can do. I have enough time for that. And,
yeah, and like would I guess Evlyn, the type of illustration then where it's like, oh look, I need a cover or I need a just a little filler illustration, just a mood piece kind of thing.
Yeah, stuff like that. And I don't deal with that often because usually people that already know my style contact me, but sometimes I can have clash with because my style is a bit cartoony. Sometimes
it's distinct.
Yeah, but sometimes there's people that expect like something more realistic kind of. So there's also like expectation to see what's the person is expecting. And if I can also say that the thing that I hate the most is like public call for artists, like when people post on a public place and they ask for artists, that's really not inviting. You can be lucky and have a fun match with that, but I think that usually it's not a good way to find someone. I prefer when I'm personally contacted and I am like, okay, well, the person care about the thing, they want to work with me. That's fun because I'm at that stage where I choose the project I'm working on. So
I think that's an excellent point, Evlyn, where it's like if you're considering a collaborator, like, and I think we've brushed up against it before, but yeah, do your research into what kind of person, like if you see, let's say you read Viral and you're like, holy crap, man, this is a really sick scenario. What the hell is this? Look at this layout. Look at these illustrations. Man, this is dope. Who's this guy? for Alex, say, or if you've read I mean, Evlyn, you're in a ton of stuff because of how you do your Patreon. So it's like, who did the cover for Downtime in Zion? So because I'm really interested in these little mole men.
But you see the mole man, the thing for Zion, that was banned. That he did approach me personally. It was like, oh, do you want to do that? And I drew him a few mole man. He was like, oh yes, let's go with that. And so
yes, mole men. Or more specifically, naked rat men.
Yeah. That was an unexpected, but we can talk about that later.
Yes. No, they're wearing clothes, we promise. It's just that it's just they don't have body hair. And Leslie, because it is usually invisible work to some extent, because you have no idea what the first draft was like, what would you say are good signs for spotting like a perspective? I mean, I know you said you send samples of your work out. Would you just say it's like, and editors kind of do them on a case-by-case basis?
So I mean, I think just like the artwork, reading previous scenarios that people have edited will give you some sort of gauge, because that's going to tell you, is this scenario organized well and easy for the keeper to use? Because while there are probably a lot of authors out there that would have a good head start on doing that, that's a lot of what the developmental editor comes in and does and says, is this user friendly?
Are all your NPCs in one place? Hey,
yes.
Why did you spread them out? So, oh my god, why is there not a dramatis personae list?
Yes.
I think we've all read a scenario that ends up with like, wait, who's this guy? Somewhere in the middle.
So if you find a scenario that it was really easy for you to plan as a keeper, like that's a good sign that they may have had a good developmental or line editor. And then I will just plug myself a little bit, like looking at my YouTube channel is a good gauge for how I analyze a scenario. So if anyone has other things that they do, like a podcast or a YouTube channel, like that can also give you a gauge for their personality, but also how they look at scenarios.
Yeah, totally. And like, I mean, just to be like, so you can see how they analyze scenarios. If you read Pookie's Miskatonic Repository column on his blog, Pookie, if you don't know him, is a pretty well-known editor. He's been around for a while and very busy. But no, he'll go through just like, I don't know how he picks them, but he'll go through Miskatonic Repository modules and he'll pick out a few things, pros and cons of each one, like setting, all that stuff. And he doesn't do an in-depth critique, but he does like a, how would I describe it? You can tell what he prioritizes based on what he is what he's picking out in terms of like what makes this a strong module, what makes this a bit of a weaker module. You can see, like Leslie was saying, like how they pick things and what catches their eye versus, like, oh yeah, this guy's an editor. I don't. He said he'd go through it, and I think the grammar might be worse than it was before. I'm not sure. I don't know enough about proper nouns, but I think this shouldn't be capitalized, which can be a thing. Turns out.
Oh, and then the other thing I was just gonna say, and particularly for role-playing games, this is particular to this, I think it is important to have someone that plays the game. So while editors are, there are a lot of talented editors in the world, someone who is actively playing the game and does so with frequency is going to be much more prepared to help elevate your scenario.
That is an excellent point.
Well, right. That's a sort of hierarchy. If all you can get is a proofreader, great. That's good.
Any system doesn't matter what they play.
An editor, then an editor who knows the game, top tier. That's your goal. That's what you want.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can only get one of the others, still better than nothing.
That's true.
Totally.
Yes.
This next question is, this might be me picking your brains because I'm writing a module at the moment, so I might be using you as a free consult. Handouts. So I have encountered so many handouts over the years where it's like, oh yeah, it's this character's diary. Here's like 4 pages. There's one paragraph that's relevant on each page. Can you guess which one, reader? And that's certainly a style you can go with. But if someone was like, hey, how can I do a good handout, or how can I do a good blank, and like they're like, look, I can't afford to bring you on, I know I can't, but I'd like some advice. And I'm pretty sure most people in the community are generally like, in my experience at least, like, oh yeah, I'll give you advice for free. That's nothing. The doing is the trick.
Yeah. I mean, I think relevance is obviously one of the big issues with handouts, but relevance doesn't always mean a clue. Sometimes relevance is the mood, the feel, so, sometimes if you get like a little, like in one of the scenarios I have, it's a little sort of invitation to an event. Is it relevant? Not really. You could just say you got an invitation, but it's kind of cool when you're at a table and you can hand someone these invitations or send them out before the game even, so there's different kinds of relevance, I guess. There's the mood relevance, and then there's the clue relevance. And I think, there may be more, but those are the 2 I can think of at the moment. So, well, like the diary example. Yeah, maybe you don't need, maybe there are clues hidden within the diary, but maybe the diary also gives you a kind of, impression of the person, or maybe if it's a period piece, like say from the Victorian era, how they're speaking can kind of sort of get you in the mood or get you in the feel of it, particularly. Although I would say that if I try to give larger ones like that, if I can give them ahead of time, like usually at the beginning of the scenario, where the player can have time to read it before the game starts. That way, you're not sitting there for 20 minutes, everyone's sitting in silence.
Oh, you're not going to do a Beyond the Mountains of Madness and be like, all right, gang, boom. Here's At the Mountains of Madness. It's a handout.
No, you're actually going to the library now. Get your phone. We'll switch over to. We're actually going to the librry now.
It's going to be
actually
neat.
sounds amazing. I'm not going to lie. That would be amazing if someone told me that.
They were kind of leaning more into LARPing, and which is fine, but that's definitely more in LARPing territory.
And then my character reads the book. Now my character reads faster than I do because he's much smarter. But
yes.
But I personally love handouts. The more handouts I can get in my scenario, the better. So I'm definitely guilty of slipping in not necessarily relevant handouts, but just because I wanted more handouts and it looked kind of cool. So it's like, yeah, I'll put that in there. What the heck?
I
They
think
can use it or not, it's up
similar.
to them.
Yeah, similar to that is considering engagement for the players. So if there are points in your scenario where things are slowing down, or there's things where it's been a while since we've had a handout, like those might be opportunities to look to see, is this a place that I can add something that's going to engage my players and make sure that everyone's like still at the table, still here, still with us.
Yeah, that's an excellent point.
Well,
Hey,
and
you
the
guys
cool
are
thing is
awake, right?
we're also in an age now where you can make audio handouts, video handouts. You can make 3D printed handouts where you can actually have a file with someone, if they have access to a 3D printer, they can 3D print physical objects now. You know, it's a little more work, but you can still make these really cool items that people can use. So we're with the technology we have now, we can actually go even a little bit further with handouts than we could, with just, the standard paper ones, which are great. But, if you can do, like, I've been dabbling a little bit with audio handouts. Someone ran Highway of Blood, and they had a friend of theirs actually make the DJ on the radio, these little clips, these little audio clips from the radio.
So cool.
And he gave me permission to put a link to it, so so people can get access to those and play them for their group. I also like to include music, which obviously you can't include with the scenario because it's all copywritten. But I provide playlists. Say, hey, if you have access to these, especially the Grindhouse stuff, these songs from the '70s, here's a sample playlist that would go really well with this scene or with this scenario. So you don't even necessarily need to provide the actual handout. You can provide, ideas for the handout if something you can't physically provide in the book.
Strong suggestions, perhaps. Yes,
exactly.
Well, I think the layout is very important for the handouts, because when you have like a big block of text, you will lose your player. But if the text is arranged in a way that you have visual chunk in it, that the eyes can move around, so that help a lot. You can have a bit of illustration sometimes that break the text and make things more interesting visually, and you can absorb little bits of it one at a time as a player when you read it. And I would say that if you do like handwritten handout, I think it's more interesting when it's really handwritten, but that take a lot of time for sometimes. But and it's very important to have a clear handwriting. But
like, based on my handwriting, I don't think anyone's going to benefit from from my scribble.
Yeah, you definitely include a little translation a lot of times.
Yeah.
If something's handwritten or if it's rough or old, give the keeper a little bit of a
plain text.
You can also have a version like a plain text version and the handwriting version. And if you do handwriting, I think it's fun when, like, if you have like scribbled notes or like you add a bit of personality of the mindset or the character that is doing the handwriting. But handwriting can be a pain sometimes.
Well, right, but as you say, you can include this part of the scenario where, say you have this journal entry and it's all this scribbled handwritten. Well, someone was nice enough to translate it with a little post-it note in actually in the document, so you can now have that someone translated it for you. So that can be kind of fun.
That actually does remind me. So someone asked in the chat about maps. Now, I personally don't tend to use maps. I tend to be I tend to do like a mood board. If I'm running online, it'll just be like, hey, here's kind of the area you're in, and here's a couple of spooky images, or a capybara if you're in the jungle. And the capybara really undermines the horror, if I'm honest. But yeah, I suppose this is one of the things, right, where it's like, even if you do a really good map, the person reading the scenario might be like, oh yeah, not going to use that. But if someone approached you guys and was like, I've got this idea, blah, 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 blah. I'd really like to have a map. And I know some people love them. Again, I'm not one of these people, but some people do. And maps as handouts, do we have any thoughts on those? Just like, how much work do you put into that? How much work do you expect someone else to put into that if you can't do it yourself?
Well, I mean, it really depends on the scenario, but I'm a big map person. I love maps because either as a keeper, which if they, just so you kind of can keep track of things,
Mhm.
but also as handouts for players if they would have access to it. And sometimes it's just easier, right? Like if it's a place that they know, then why not give them a map so they can just kind of have an idea? Because I love Theater of the Mind, but that can only go so far in some cases. So
Totally.
having that map available, even if you don't use it that much, to me I still like to provide one way, one way or the other. Again, in Highway of Blood, there's the map is more important in some parts than others. So, you use it some points and some others, but there's quite a few maps in that one. In Viral, there's a map, but it's a handout because it's a printout of, from, let's say, like some like Google Maps or something like that. So they can, they can sort of see where things are, and, things are circled and there's notes written on it. And so it's that, it's more of a handout in that case where they can sort of, look it over and decide where where they're going to go.
Oh, wow. It's all done in MapQuest.
Solid.
I made up some other name that wasn't Google. I made
Yeah.
up some fake map site. But the point is that like I guess I'm just a map person, so maybe that's just a personal preference. But I find them, I've learned through trial and error that even if I'm not a map person, that some people are, and so I still like to provide them, because I'm writing for other keepers as well. And that's the tough thing to remember. You're not just writing for yourself as a keeper. You're writing for other people and what they might do.
Yeah, totally. And like, as a keeper, you might not like the idea that someone who's reading your scenario is going to do what they're inevitably going to do, and that's take the bits they like and the bits they don't. They might repurpose, but it's not going to be run the exact, like, no matter how well written, no matter how well produced, it's going to vary when it hits the table, right?
Don't get me wrong. I absolutely love that. That's one of my favorite things about it. Like, okay, as an example, when one of my first Call of Cthulhu scenario, which was the Pipeline, the first one was good, and then someone ran it, and they changed a few things around, and I'm watching this play of it. It's like, that was so much better than what I did. Why didn't I think of that?
Totally.
Yeah.
So I contacted them and said, hey, do you mind if I use that? and they even had a little hand-drawn map they use. So it's like he said you could use that. So that's how I got the 2.0 version with the new cover. Because someone thought of a much better idea than I did. But even like Highway of Blood, like, I heard of someone who was on a podcast who's running it where all the main characters are professional wrestlers, which is just brilliant.
That's certainly high drama, if nothing else, man.
Oh yeah, I think they used Pulp Cthulhu for it, which it wasn't designed for, but I think, obviously that's what you would use. So I love when keepers change things, especially if they're gonna broadcast them, because I love to see what other people are gonna do with it. I don't want people just doing what I would do. That's boring. I want to see what other people are gonna do with it and have fun with it.
I think to add a little bit to the map conversation, I'm also a map person, but I think that even if the keeper is not, it helps them visualize to help them explain to their players. So I think it's always a benefit to have it. And in terms of like the amount of effort you want to put into it, you don't have to put a ton of time into it. Like, as long as you have the basics so the keeper can understand and help visualize, that's all you really need. I mean, you can go as fancy and go as much into it as you want to, but you don't have to.
Yeah. And you know what? If you're not great with making maps, then don't be. Lean into that. Literally hand draw on a lined piece of paper, 3-hole punched, scan that and put that in your thing. Like, it's like someone just hand drew it real quick. And it actually looks like you meant to do that.
You guys find this floor plan of the house
to look like it was hand drawn by someone who didn't know what they were doing.
Hey, that money on the page, that's art.
Yeah,
Exactly. I meant to do that.
I often draw maps, especially because I do a lot of dungeons, illustration for dungeons. Sometimes they ask me to do a map. And I think what is important is that the map establish relationship between elements. What I really don't like is when you have the maps of a village and just a bunch of houses and people, and you read it, it's like a all over effect. And so I think it's important when you see relationship between elements and stuff in the map. And as an artist, when I drew a map, it's what is important is to give some detail that help you visualize things, but you also need to be careful not to define too much, I think, because you want people to also be able to imagine and describe things in their own way. So yeah, I think there's like a balance to do there. And I think another thing that it's kind of map related, but that I think could be helpful to see more of them is flowchart. I've discovered them through I've appreciated them through Mothership's publication. They use a lot of flowchart, and I think that flowchart can help a lot for the game master when you read the text to visualize. Like maybe for investigation scenario, flowchart could be also sometimes helpful. And I think there's flowchart or underused tool that could be used in a lot of role-playing game publication.
And
Yeah,
timelines. I feel like
I was gonna say
also-
timelines. Yep, 100%.
I love timelines. They're so
Oh,
nice.
They're so good. It's one of my favorite things about reading Vaesen scenarios, because Vaesen like is all about timelines. For if the investigators don't do stuff, it's like, okay, look, here's the deal. If your players just faff about, here's what happens.
Yeah.
Point by point. Here's all the bad
can-
stuff that'll happen if they don't
Yeah.
interfere.
Yes.
You can't be the ticking clock.
Yeah.
It's especially if the players know there's a ticking clock.
And you also need to be aware that it's not all illustrators that like to do map or are comfortable doing some type of map. Like me, I don't like doing like very technical map or like that are more like more precise. I prefer to do like more like relation map, like oh, the house is there's a road, but I don't need to provide the exact length of the
There's a
things,
creepy lane between these two places.
Yeah.
But yeah, like when I worked on the Mothership scenario, Horizon Station Echo, they asked me if I wanted to do the map, and they had like a base with a very specific building and stuff, and say no, I don't feel comfortable doing that, and they invited someone else, and it was a very good match between our two art style, and I'm very happy with the outcome.
I having read that, it's like, yeah, they basically got a tech drawer in to do the map, and it's beautiful. It's really clear, and it's, it communicates the space station really well. But yeah, Evlyn, that is completely different to your style, and I think that does come back to our point of like, get to know the person before you kind of pick them for the job.
Yeah.
And get to know their strengths, definitely, because one, they'll probably just say no if it's not something they want to work on. If they're like, oh geez, no, it's not worth my hassle dealing with this.
But it's not everybody. Sometimes people that I have difficulty say no, so you need to be
It's
careful
true.
with that.
Yeah, that is true. That's something to think about. I'm just aware of the time. We've just hitting up the 1 hour mark. So I thought we might open up to some questions here. Give me a second, I'll put on my glasses and read the chat. Yeah, a lot of comments. A couple of people mentioning different cartographing tools for maps, because that's what we were talking about last. So give me a second here. Okey-dokey. Scroll up. Bridget wants to hear from your cat, Leslie.
She laughed. She abandoned me.
Let me see.
There was a question about if I was doing handouts.
Yes, there was. And I'm trying to find it again because I saw it as it was scrolling past, and now I'm like, let me. Speaking of editors, there's a list of. Oh, that is true. Heinrich mentioned it in the chat. There is actually a list of editors, artists, other potential collaborators on the Miskatonic Repository Discord.
Yep.
So it's worth a look. It's also upload it as a file to the Facebook Miskatonic Creators Circle. Oh gosh, I've completely lost. So this is why they say have someone else keep track of the questions.
I know there was one question from Aaron on most common mistakes that we each see.
Yeah, love to hear that.
Yeah, maybe we can get started on that one. I know for me, the most common mistake that I see is authors or writers hiding things from the keeper because they're approaching it more like a story rather than a scenario. And so like my biggest tip is be very upfront with the keeper right away. This is what you need to know. This is the plot twist. This is what happens. This is what your players are trying to achieve. Tell me in the first couple paragraphs. And that way they're not wondering as they're trying to plan throughout the scenario. And then halfway through something happens. They're like, oh, wait, what? And then they get confused.
Yeah, that is, again, as a person who reads modules, please never do that. You're not trying to surprise me.
Exactly. Right. Tell me what's happening.
One of the classic errors I receive when people ask me to do illustration is when they provide me stuff that are totally not visual, like telling me that the grandfather of the character I'm going to illustrate was a carpenter, stuff like that.
Unnecessary death. One question that just came up was Bridget asks a very good question. Question: I know most people are uncomfortable talking about money, but could we get an at-a-glance price range for each of these services? So, like, if someone was like, "Hey, I'd like to kind of get you on board," just I'm in the project planning phase, and I'm just doing research. What kind of money should I be looking at to get you on board for X? I want 3 illustrations. I'd love to get, it's going to be 80 pages, I think. I'd love to get, yes, it's a huge scenario. I was thinking of a work document, so I was like, 80 pages is normal. No, it's going to be like 30 pages. So I'd love to get some design layout. And Leslie, I had a friend who did some design process stuff with me. What kind of ballpark figures am I kind of looking at?
I can go first. For a developmental or inline edit, so I can't speak for all editors. I can only speak for myself because everyone charges differently. So I'm just going to speak from my perspective. And I also edit fiction as well. So I'm going to specifically be talking about scenarios for Miskatonic Repository and what you can expect from me. Generally, a developmental and line edit combined is going to be around 2 cents per word. So it depends on how long your scenario is, because it's going to take me more time to go through. But that's going to give you a general ballpark for my rates.
Sure. Yeah. That's, guys, I know this is one of those questions where it's like I put you really on the spot.
Well, I can say usually ask illustrator for their price charts. Usually we have like a price chart for every type of illustration.
Okay.
Sometimes, so that can be useful. You can say, oh, I'm considering maybe to approach you for illustration work. Do you have do you have like a price chart? Can I see it? So that could give you an idea. Like for myself, like the usually like a character is $50 for a black and white illustration, but it can vary if the size, if it's complicated, or sometimes if I like I have a lot of similar small illustration, I do like a bundled price, so it's very different from situation.
Yeah, like, and I'm aware that when they're like, because it's still a creative, fundamentally, no matter how technical we get with the writing stuff or whatever, it's still a creative endeavor. No matter how like instructional you are versus moody, it's still going to be creative. So like, yeah, right. It's going to be case by case because you're going to be different to a different author, and if you've worked with this person before, they might be able to say, "Look, I know I know working with you is okay, so you have my rate list from last time. It's still the same price." Or it's like, it can be very depends on the document. Might be how long is a piece of string.
Yeah, I mean, the overall cost of something like a cover and like layout will vary depending on depending on a lot of different things, but I also do a special deal for Miskatonic Repository creators anyway, because I want to see more creators get stuff out there. And it bothers me when someone has a great scenario, but maybe their cover's not that great, or maybe their layout is kind of choppy and uneven and things don't quite line up, or they use 20 different fonts on a single page, which no, don't do that. Little things like that just hit that one part of my brain that it's like forget it was on a chalkboard. So I offer special rates to Miskatonic Repository people that I would say just regular freelance work.
Sure.
So for a cover, I might do anywhere between say 60 and like 100, 120 if they want a back cover, that sort of thing. Layouts, again, it depends on length, but a simple, basically a nice simple layout with no fancy borders, none of that, just neat with with places for their illustrations and so forth. That can be around 100 and 120 depending on what they're doing. So I try to be flexible with them. But the nice thing too about Miskatonic Repository and Drive-Thru-RPG in general is you can also offer to as to share in the profit. For example, I've done that with some editors who rather than pay for editing, we decide to say you get a third of the profit, that sort of thing. So you can sort of play around with that as well if you want to, if you can find someone willing to do that, which is kind of nice too.
Totally.
Yeah, so it really depends. If you're getting someone professional though, it can be pricey. If you're going for artwork.
Totally. And this is one of those
editing
things
and layout. It can be pretty expensive. So if you can find someone who's willing to work with you, who's willing to, give you a break on it, or take it in trade, that sort of thing. And that's great. That's the other thing too, is if you can trade, if you're an editor but you just can't do layout or book, then talk to me. If I need an editor and I can't, because I can't really do, shouldn't do that to my own stuff, then I'll approach you and I can, we can trade stuff. So. And then again, that's the nice thing about this community. We can do that, and that's kind of the idea behind that list that Heinrich was talking about, where we can sort of, share each other's skills.
Yeah, and related to that, there are often people that want to get into freelancing that might be an opportunity to connect with people to trade work as well. So when I first was getting into scenario editing, I did a couple scenarios for free in exchange for testimonials, because I was trying to gain reviews and be able to show that I work well with others. So if you are new to writing, you might want to check out, and if you're not at the point where you can afford a professional editor, check out people who want to get into editing and kind of go on that journey together, and it will benefit both of you.
Yeah, there's a reason people do Kickstarters for a lot of books, is because they're expensive.
Yeah,
right.
Totally.
So when you do a Kickstarter and because you're making this really big fancy book, that's why. If you just
Alex needs to eat, guys.
I needs to eat, but yeah. So you can certainly you can certainly do it with less. You just gotta it takes a little more work to fish around and ask people, but like I said, most of the people here will do their best to help out as much.
And as I said earlier, I think we're all as I said, advice is free. Doing the thing is the trick. It's I can tell you what I think about doing something all day long, but you doing it will be different. I was just before.
Did you have something to say, Evlyn?
Oh yeah, sorry, Evlyn.
I just want to add a little, I noticed that a lot of people try to mimic very professional very professional presentation, like something that Hasbro will publish or something like that. Like, but it's not always like something you should go for, especially if you're like doing small edition and design and self-publication. You can do a lot with something that is more personal or simpler. Like you can have a good cover with only a single small significant illustration in the middle if you have like a good layout. And you know, there's different way of to approach it. And I think a lot of people try to do this big fancy professional presentation that is not always in service of their book.
Totally, yeah. No, that's absolutely a thing. I've seen a lot of I think you see it more on the DMs Guild than the Miskatonic Repository, but you know, folks that try to get something reminiscent of the actual 5e covers, and you're like, slow down there, Chief. You can't afford that guy.
Right.
let me tell you, that guy, he only does covers for a living. Like not everyone's gonna be able to afford Doug Kovacs. No,
and I think also, like, I don't want anyone on the call to be intimidated, because I feel like we're talking a lot about how to level up your scenario. But
Totally.
from my perspective, like, the most important thing is to do it and go after it and try it, and you're going to learn and you're going to improve, and you can continue to level up as you go. But you don't have to start with all of it. Just get started, give it a try, because I think it'll be a good experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and your first scenario is not going to be the best one. Yeah, but right. It'll get out there, but
it'll be the first one.
That's right. It will be the first one.
So, yeah. I mean, that, like, I imagine this was I missed yesterday's panel, but I imagine one key piece of advice was get that first one out there, and then after that, it's a hell of a lot easier because now you know all the weird hiccups that you hit last time.
Yeah, because when you publish, you see your work in a different light, and
totally.
Yeah, that's very helpful.
Now you'll also come back to it. You'll also come back to it every once in a while and be like, "Oh God."
Yeah, it happens.
But you know what? That's a good thing. That means you're improving and learning, and I think that's what everyone in the community wants for you. Because then we can read your scenarios and they're better.
A quick side note, if anyone wants to laugh, please watch my first YouTube video, because it was absolutely terrible, but I'm so like thankful for it, because then I can compare. So
yeah, I mean, you can always look back, and hey, it's important to be able to measure your progress as a person, and it doesn't matter what the thing is, it helps. Evan asked me an excellent question and I'm just like, oh boy. He was like, no, it'll really get him talking. I was like, sure. So let's say we have a limited budget. We're like, you know, I've saved a bit of money. What should I prior now? What would you guys say as writer creators? Would you prioritize interior art, cover art, getting it edited?
Edit. Yeah, 100% edit. You know, I mean, the cover will get people there, but you know, with if they open it and it's a mess, it'll never get played.
It won't get played. It won't get reviews, and reviews help you gain traction and gain a reputation as a writer. So I would agree, and I'm also biased, but yes, editing.
I would say cover is a close second, but you know, because ultimately, if they'll never see the great editing if they're not attracted to it. But I think, you know, weighing both against each other, the editing is more long lasting than the cover. The cover's just too shiny, but the other's actually going to get it played.
As long as the cover isn't the Adobe little triangle with the loops, you're fine. It'll get somebody.
Again, I think that you can, like with good art direction, or if you're doing it smart, you can have like a very simple illustration that is intriguing. Yeah. You don't need like a full cover art. You know, you can. So if you have like a solid edited text with like an illustration on the cover that it's at least intriguing or attractive.
I was going to say that you can do a very simple cover that can still be intriguing, right?
Like, I mean, we could all look at the oh cripes, the Penley Grange Mummy guys. it would help if I could remember the
Seeds
name
of
of the seed.
Terror.
Thank you, Leslie. The Seeds of Terror covers, where they are very simple covers. You know, like just as in,
Yep.
this is as, it's bright colors, it's the title, it's got a Cthulhu head,
Mhm.
it has told you a lot of stuff and grabbed your eye in a very short period of time. And
Well, yeah. I mean, it just you can imagine a cover just an all black cover,
Mhm.
maybe with a slight gradient. Yeah, have a floor with just a pool of blood and a book laying in the blood, and then just simple text at the top, and that could be a pretty cool looking cover,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Just because people are gonna be like, what's this about? This is interesting.
Yeah.
It
Totally.
draws people in. Sometimes the mystery of of what you put on the cover can draw people in too, even if it's not complicated or overly artistic, let's say.
Yeah. And like, I mean, if you look at some of the biggest sellers on the repository, the Korean ones do great. They have very basic covers, in visually at least. It's usually a single color.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
There's a line, but
Yes.
like the cover for Rose Crystal is very simple. I did a tapestry background, and I did only a small illustration in a circle like that. And
Yep.
yeah, it's very simple, but like with a good visual signature.
Yeah. And like, again, I don't work in this field, but I'm going to put a statement out there. If you can't afford amazing art, or rather, if you can't afford the one really big piece that you want, that you might want, that you're like, this will really be great, I really want this in my piece, blah, blah, blah. Consider, as Evlyn suggested, like smaller pieces. But what they'll do is if you have a consistent art direction, and that's a totally that's almost a different panel, but if you have a consistent style throughout, that can really pull the whole together. But your editor is still gonna be the one that's like, yeah, hey, this is I have no idea what the hell you wrote. This is, buddy, what?
What?
Oh my god. Yeah, like that wasn't as divisive as we hoped, Evan, but you know what? we got a good discussion out of it. And like, if you are tight on a budget, we said editing first, but try and pick your battles. You mightn't know what they're gonna be, but you'll find them as you go, and that's why we're like, for your first one, just do it. Just get it done. And that way you'll at least know what priority things should take. Because the reason I'm kind of like, we can't tell you, is because the flow is different for each person. Like, the creative process is different fundamentally for each one of us. Like, there's 4 people in this call, we would all make a scenario differently. And I can tell you, having read Evlyn's and Alex's, they're very different. Like, just, you guys have completely different approaches to material and style and relaying information, and both are good. Both are crystal clear and wonderful to read, and both were wonderful to run, by the way. But
apologies for all the maps.
I just don't use them. I skim a few pages. but we're like, I think we can't tell you what's actually important, because you'll find that out for yourself by doing it. We could tell you what's important to us, but that might not actually be helpful to you. That might actually be a little bit unhelpful, actually, because you'd be trying to do what we're doing, which is, that's not what you're. Do your thing. Just figure it out. pushing you out the door. Let me see here. I've got a good one from Bridget. Alex, this one's fairly directed squarely at you. what information do you actually need from us when commissioning art/covers? So Evlyn, you too. I actually only saw the word cover, so that's why I said Alex. I'm always worried that I'm providing too much or too little information. Would you prefer we provide inspiration examples, a nod towards previous work that you've done, that sort of thing? So yeah, like Alex, you described
I guess kind
sometimes
of all
what
of
it's
the
like.
kind of all of the above. I mean, because you want, I mean, the elevator pitch is great, right?
Mhm.
But I'll usually ask, like, I'll first say, like, what, because that's your first impression of someone's scenario. So how do you want that? What do you want that first impression to be?
Yeah.
Is it mysterious? Is it gory? Is it, do you want it to be more, it depends on the time period. Do you want it to reflect that? Do you want it to reflect, do you want it to be a little spoilery maybe, or do you not want it spoilery at all? Maybe the cover can actually mislead a little bit because that's what, that's something the players might see. And then once you get inside, it's the keeper knows better. But, so you have to basically just have the discussion and I'll probably, most people, most artists, I assume, but I always ask, what do you want it to look like? And yeah, if you have some examples of either mine or even someone else's, say, oh, hey, I really like this. This one really stood out to me. And if maybe I think based on what you've told me that that wouldn't work as well for you, I might say, well, maybe we could lean a bit more this way, and and we'll have sort of a discussion about it. But it definitely helps to have, a discussion like this in real time versus texting back and forth and that sort
Totally.
of thing, which that's a good way to get started. But this is something that helps me.
Yeah,
right,
like
because I can
arrange a
get-
meeting, I think is
Yeah,
like
yeah,
Leslie,
100%.
you said the same earlier, where it's like arrange a call. Just
Yeah,
get to know who you're working with, because it's quite personal.
it is,
Incredibly.
but it is your first impression. So
Mhm.
I guess if you had to boil it down, really, then it's what impression do you want people to get by looking at it? What do you want people to feel?
So
Because
Alex, if I said like,
that's what you're gonna get.
I was going to ask if I said, so if I just said like, I want a Shoggoth Lord, just really ripping it up on a guitar, man. Maybe while skateboarding.
Great.
Well,
then let's do that. I mean, yeah, if you have a very clear idea of what you want. Now, if maybe there's something about it that's, well, like maybe if I know I can't do that for you, then I'll direct you to someone else or say,
Mhm.
yeah, it's not really my style. I really, you might have to look for someone else. But if I can, I might decide to say, what about these ideas? And sometimes I'll provide, in the early stage, I might provide a few ideas if we're trying to sort of narrow it down.
Mhm.
Sort of general looks that you can sort of then pick from and sort of, sort of zero in on the look that you want, because I might come up with something that you hadn't thought of that you might like better, or maybe you just don't, and that's fine.
Mhm.
I've worked in advertising, so you get kind of a thick skin when when you get a client come in and this piece of artwork that you worked on for like a week and they're like, yeah, I don't like it, rip.
Did you have to rip it,
Oh,
man? I could have used it for something else.
Okay. Yeah, so
Why did you rip my
I mean,
my Cintiq in half?
don't do that. That's really rude, and you shouldn't do that. But
Mhm.
you
Remember what we said about
but
being respectful.
yeah, yeah. But I mean, it's okay to not want the same, because ultimately, if it's your book, then you're the art director, right? You're the
Mhm.
one who decides what it looks like. And if I realize that I can't do that for you, then I'll say I can't, or say, hey, who could do this really well for you? This person. I would talk to them.
Mhm.
Because I'm not going to do something for you that you're not going to like. That doesn't work for anyone.
yeah, and cover art is very different from interior art. There's
Yeah.
it needs to stand alone, and yeah, I find cover art much more difficult than doing the same size illustration but in interior art. And yeah, but so I would say also maybe telling the artist where, like, the space for the text, if you have an idea of it, so that's very helpful. And what I like personally is to receive like maybe one, like maybe two pat, like you can say, oh, I would like that, but or also that, like to have two options, because like I said, cover art is very tricky. Sometimes you try something and it's not really working. So sometimes having like another option, you can say, okay, this does not work, I'll try that instead. And because that's sometimes you have something in mind, but when you put it on the cover, it's not really working. So it's just tricky.
Yeah, totally. And like, you know, it's going to land on it first time. That's
well, the other thing
in
about
almost
cover too
everything.
is not just the art; it's also the text. You know, the font you're using, the layout. You know,
You'll also have to have your Miskatonic Repository logo down there
right,
in one of the corners.
Yeah, and that's kind of one of my little pet peeves. Like I see people like put it like it takes up half the page. I'm like,
Yeah.
it's
Oh man,
a little big to me. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe it's just me. It seems a little large.
Mhm.
I mean, you need to have it visible on there. Great, I understand that.
Yeah.
But when it's like takes up a third of the page, I'm like, that's a little large to me.
And if you don't put it on there at all, Bridget comes to get you in the night.
Yes,
and
and rightly so.
Yeah. No,
But yeah, it's really the whole look, and it's one of those things where it's one of the times that you can be inconsistent with your art. Like the cover art need not match the inner art, but all the inner art should look like it goes together, ideally.
even if it's different artists, like
Yeah,
that tone, I think, like what we're trying to say with themes earlier, just like have a through line, right?
Yeah,
right.
For interior art, you need like if you use different artists, use a palette. Like if you have too many, it will become like all over the place.
Yeah, and you can get away with little differences here and there. Like for example, if you have just mood art, but then maybe your portraits can look different if you have character portraits. Those can be different, but as long as those are consistent with themselves, even if they're different from the other interior art, that can be okay too. You know, some of it is you have to play by ear, but yeah, consistency is important.
Yeah, totally. And like I think if your portraits are different, sometimes your portraits will be different because you got one artist to do 5 just head and shoulder portraits, and you got someone else to do a map and picture of a sick monster. And the only thing tying those together is like that they're grayscale. That's enough. Sometimes that's enough to just be like consistent language applies to not only your words, which an editor will remind you of, because it's called parallelism. It's actually very interesting. But you're still communicating, so you need to be mindful of the language you're using with images as well as words. I'm just keenly aware that we have about a couple of minutes left, like 2 minutes actually, now that I've looked at it. I was going to ask you real quick, guys, other than just get that first one done, do you have anything that you're like, think about this when you're doing a scenario? Just words of wisdom or anything that you're like, I found this helpful.
For me, it's try to put yourself in your player's shoes. And that's a big part of what I do too, is I'm having to take the role of players, which can be very unpredictable, as everyone knows, right?
They never do what you want.
Yeah, it's taking a step back sometimes and being like, okay, if I am a player at this table, am I having fun? And just like, that's a very basic question, but I don't think that sometimes that's always a thought when writers are just trying to get it out there.
Yeah. I would say think of the goals of your your villains or whatever's involved.
Antagonists.
Your antagonists, yes.
Because sometimes you're the villain.
That's true. You want to think of the motivations and plans of your antagonist, because that's I kind of read it assuming that that's all going to play out if the players don't intervene.
Yeah,
like this is what's going to happen. That's where the timeline sort of thing comes in. But if you have this sort of idea of what's going to happen, and you have their motivations and their ideas and thoughts in mind, then it's a lot easier for the keeper to sort of react to it, to say, if I understand the villain or the antagonist, then even if the players do something that's completely out of left field, I can anticipate how they're going to react to that. What are they going to do when this happens? Because that's ultimately what's going to tell the story. Mine tend to be a lot more my stories tend to be a lot more sandboxy. But you know, if you have a decent evil plan in mind, then as long as the keeper knows what that is and how the antagonist wants to play that out, you know, you can adapt to whatever happens. So to me, that's sort of the big thing, to have a clear, you know, idea of what their goals are.
Yeah. Me, I would say, as a person that do a bit of everything, and I've done a lot of self-publication design, I would say maybe start with something very simple, like a pamphlet adventure or one-page dungeon, where you do everything. Because doing it once, you will understand better the different roles. So when you ask other people to do these things, you have a better understanding a bit. Like I think it's a good thing to start with, or maybe involve only one person, like do a first very small project with only another person, and you will see a bit, like you will experience a bit all the the step of the work. So when you ask like an illustrator or something, you understand because you've done it a bit yourself. Like start something small, that, and after that you can, when you go for a bigger project, yeah, you will better understand each role. But because personally, this is how I started. I started doing very small design, very simple things.
Yeah, you don't want to start writing Masks of Nyarlathotep, right?
Yeah, no. One, guys,
You know,
we're gonna be
that
honest,
shouldn't be your
it's not
first
gonna
project.
be great.
and
you know, start with a small scenario, a simple location, really isolated if possible. Keep it simple and start with that, because that's gonna, you know, it's gonna be easy to finish, and it's gonna make sure that you're sort of focused more, I guess.
And the line is getting very blurry between design and edition house publication. Like there's, you know, it's not because you're making a design that it's not meaningful, and do print copies. That's also a good thing, sir. Like if you do a small design, do print copy, even if it's just pamphlet adventure, you can mail them, and people even like it in their end. It's significant for
Totally. I will say again, as a person who runs quite a few and reads a lot of scenarios, reads more than I run, to be honest. Having it in hand is invaluable, because I can put annotations, which I know will make some of you very unhappy, but I do write in my books. But yeah, like it is also experience. It'll give you a better idea for if you ever want to do something a little bigger, and you'll have gotten your teeth into it, and it's what I said earlier, right, about the knowing what's important in your process. You'll only know it by doing it. And our ultimate takeaway, as the chat has said, is get it done. just finish a module. Just put it out there, and people will read it. They'll tell you what they think. For better or worse, they'll tell you what they think. And you can learn from that and do your best.
Yeah.
And I think one thing I'd like to mention, I know that we're almost 5 minutes over time, is that working with anybody else as a collaborator is an opportunity for both of you to learn from the other. No matter how much or how little experience you have, it is a huge opportunity to get an insight into how to make the best product possible. And I don't mean as in like commercial product. I mean like, how do you get what's in your head in its clearest form, in the form that is closest to, again, what's in here to out there? And that is hard. It is really tricky, and you won't know it unless you do it. But I think, yeah, will we leave it there?
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much. Leslie, Alex, Evlyn, thank you all so much. I have been your moderator, John Casey, and I hope you all learned something. And feel free to hit up our list of creators on the Miskatonic Repository. We are more than happy to be like, oh yeah, this type of stuff you're looking for. This guy does that really good. You want that grindhouse look, Alex?
Yep.
It's he's got a thing.